Okay, good morning, everybody, and apologies for the slight delay. We were having a few little technical issues. So first of all, I'd like to wish everybody good morning and thank you for joining our first webinar on the Teagasc Research Insights Webinar series. This series will address the challenges and opportunities in the agri-food sector and showcase the latest thinking on a range of topics. The webinars will outline Teagasc research and innovation in these areas. Over the next 3 webinars, we will discuss the importance of soil health for underpinning food production and other environmental services. Soil is a finite resource, and good soil health is required to underpin its functions, such as producing food. Today's webinar, we will have 3 speakers. Minister Martin Heydon will speak to us, Jean-Francois Soussana, from INRAE in France, and David Wall from Teagasc Johnstown Castle. The speakers will introduce the new soil health and food mission and summarise the current status of Irish soil health. At the end of the webinars, there will be a questions and answers discussion, and I encourage people to, during the presentations, to type your questions concisely into the questions and answers tab. And if you could indicate the person to which the question should be directed to, we would appreciate it. So again, type during the presentations into the Q&A tab. I will be moderating the questions as there's going to be a lot of questions, and we've only got about 10 minutes to go through those questions at the end. So we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we possibly can. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Minister Heydon if he is online. And I'm not sure if he is yet. Okay, so we might then move across to Jean-Francois Soussana, who is going to introduce the soil health and food mission. So Jean-Francois, if you could share your presentation, I think. Yeah, if you could share your presentation and unmute your microphone, please.
Yes, thank you, Karl, and good morning, everybody. And I'm glad, as a member of the mission board of the European Commission on soil health and food, to be able to present to you this mission, which is entitled "Caring for Soil is Caring for Life." And as you can see with this title, we would like to set a sort of overarching goal, so to ensure that 75% of soils are healthy by 2030. And this is for food, healthy food, for people, for nature, and for climate. So let me go back first to what a mission is. Missions are a novelty in the research and innovation program of the European Commission. And those research and innovation missions can be described as a set of actions which are coordinated and directed towards achieving a common goal. And as you may understand, some of those goals in the past were like bringing a man to the moon. So really the sort of a moonshot idea. But in our days, we see that the challenges are possibly a bit less technological and more societal. A mission should be bold and inspirational. It should indicate a clear direction with targeted, measurable, and time-bound actions, be ambitious but also realistic, spark innovation across disciplines, sectors, and actors, and be based on a bottom-up approach for multiple solutions. So this is really the Mazzucato report, which sets that problem-solving approach to fuel innovation-led growth in Europe. With the process of discussion within the Commission services and with member states, 5 mission areas were defined. And we have mission areas which range from adaptation to climate change, healthy oceans, climate neutral and smart cities, cancer, and soil health and food. Interestingly, you can note that these mission areas are in part connected. What we can do with soil health can impact the health of the oceans, may also impact through the healthy food the diseases like cancer. And actually, part of what happens in the cities is also related to soils. And certainly, adaptation to climate change is a cross-cutting issue that also addresses soil health. Why do we have a need then for a mission? Caring for soil is caring for life. It's, I think, very clear that healthy soils are the basis for nutritious and safe food. And in addition, the soils deliver a range of interconnected ecosystems functions, which are in fact vital, related to water, to nutrients, to climate, related to landscape features, but also to cultural services. Certainly, we know that soils is a scarce and non-renewable resource. It takes hundreds of years to generate 1 centimeter of topsoil. So if we do not use soil in an adequate way, we will lose it. And indeed, soils are threatened. With help of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, we could see that 60 to 70% of all soils in Europe are unhealthy as a direct result of many pressures and management practices, including the role of erosion, the role of pollution, and so on. So soil health is a key for implementation of the European Green Deal and its strategies. The farm-to-fork strategies, the biodiversity strategy, for instance, are directly related to soils, but also the zero pollution and the climate strategies. So we see the mission's policy relevance in terms of its impact on 6 to 8 sustainable development goals, those related to food, those related to climate change, those related to biodiversity and soil status, for instance. And we also see it is directly related to the Green Deal through those strategies that I already mentioned, like biodiversity, farm-to-fork, zero pollution, and the climate law. And you see that with soil health, we can target many aspects related to the healthy food, to the nutrient cycling, to the water, to the carbon capture and sequestration in soils, to the conservation of biodiversity, and also to the cultural services that landscapes can deliver. So other European policies which are central to achieving the healthy soils are the Common Agricultural Policy, but also bioeconomy and water framework directives. Why is it urgent to act? Well, we know that there are potentially up to 2.8 million sites which are contaminated in the European Union, where soils are contaminated, although it's only 1/4 of those sites which are really known, inventoried. We know that about 2/3 to 3/4 of the agricultural soils are at risk of eutrophication. This means having excess nutrients that can lead to severe water quality problems and affect biodiversity. Also, we lose carbon at a rate on average of 0.5% per year from the agricultural soils, at least from the arable soils. And we know that 50% of our peatlands are drained and are losing carbon. So in fact, soils in Europe are a source rather than a sink of carbon. Moreover, we have unsustainable water erosion rates on 1/4 of our soils and risks of desertification on 1/4 of the land, especially in the southern, central, and eastern Europe. Costs are estimated to be in excess of 50 billion euros per year, which the costs which are associated with soil degradation. So the urgency to act is extremely clear. And we know that on top of this, land degradation will be further exacerbated in the future by the effects of climate change. So what sort of vision can we provide? Our goal would be that by 2030, 3/4 of all soils in each of the member states are able to provide essential ecosystem services and therefore are healthy soils. So we would like to restore 50% of the degraded land, to conserve the high soil organic stocks where they are, like in the peatlands, in the grasslands, and to increase in the arable land by 0.1 to 0.5% per year the carbon stocks. We would like to stop the soil sealing, to reuse the urban soils for urban development, to reduce soil pollution and to double the rate of restoration of the polluted sites. We see the need to prevent erosion on 30 to 50% of the land, which is currently with unsustainable erosion rates, improve the habitat quality for the soil biota, and this also needs to reduce the compaction of the subsoils. And in this way, we could reduce also the global footprint of EU through its food and timber imports, because you see the problem of land degradation is that through our imports of food products, of timber, we also create problems outside of Europe. So we create a footprint that we need to reduce in terms of the land degradation. So then how do we see the organization of the mission? It is organized across building blocks and supporting actions. Building blocks, they need first to have some research and innovation programs supporting the mission. We see a large role of creating some signpost farms or lighthouse farms that can bring the innovation to the field. We could also see the development of living laboratories associating the scientists and the farmers working together. We see the need to develop soil indicators and a robust soil monitoring program at the EU, but also member state levels, and to better communicate and have citizen engagement. And you see those actions, they can come together, and this is on this figure where you see that we bring together, for the purpose of soil health, improve management practices, improve extension services, policies and regulations, engagements of consumers and industries, supported by the Lighthouse, the Living Labs, and monitoring and framework, and by a research and innovation program. I'd like to go back to this creation of knowledge and innovation, which needs to be shared with the farmers, to be a co-creation. And in this way, you need to have participatory, systemic, transdisciplinary research that can happen in what we call Living Lab to have co-innovation. We have lighthouses or signpost farm for demonstration of solutions, training and communication. And we think we need to really expand the number of those living labs and lighthouses or signpost farms and have up to 1,000 or 2,000 at the European Union scale. Supporting action are about the policy frameworks. There are many options with the Common Agricultural Policy reform, like having some ecosystem services rewarded for farmers through eco schemes. One could think that there are some advances in the legislation that need to be made for soils. Certainly, we need to have some informed choices by consumers about the impacts of their choices on soils, to think about how can businesses engage into this, possibly through food labels, for instance, and to strengthen the advisory services and to have also information platforms for land managers. With this mission, we expect large impacts. We think that soil health is a starting point for systemic transformations of the whole food chain, that it can change the practices in agriculture, forestry, and industries, and that it can also create some more resilient bio-based industries and food industries, increase awareness of consumers and society, and increase the role of citizens in preserving these resources. And we would also like to see the reduction of the footprint of Europe on land degradation. I don't have time to detail this, but as any action, we are working on the agenda. So we would think of having a co-design phase, a co-implementation phase with the member states, monitoring and co-assessment, cross-cutting and enabling actions like the citizen engagement and the communication. And last, we are, and I'm very happy to contribute with you to this today, engage into external communication, so through all the social media, through webinars, events, and we conducted also a survey through the European Commission services, and we have a series of events that are coming up on our agenda, with citizen engagement events already happening this summer, some research and innovation days contributions this fall, contribution to the European Innovation Programme Agri Seminar, and to the European Week of Regions and Cities. And these are just examples, there are far more. So I'm very glad to be able to contribute to your webinar today and to be able to answer to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Francois, and thank you for sticking to time as well. I understand now that we have Minister Martin Heydon online. Minister, I'm going to, okay, if you unmuted yourself. So, Minister, apologies about the technical issues. Jean-Francois has just given us a really good overview of the Soil, Food and Health mission, but I think you're going to maybe give us a few more words around the soil mission, or the EU missions, and the importance to Ireland. Over to you, Minister.
Absolutely, Karl, and apologies for the technical difficulties. I had hoped to do this by camera today, but unfortunately my difficulties logging in here, I have to do this over the phone, but it's still really good to be part of this Teagasc webinar, and I thank you for the opportunity and Teagasc to open the first Irish citizen engagement event relating to the European Commission's mission on soil health and food. It is, as we know, one of only 5 mission areas, so clearly it is seen as a critical area of importance. Soil, as we know, is like the skin of the planet on which life itself depends. It's a living organism, and as such it's very dynamic, fragile and complex, and it serves 2 broad purposes. The first is it provides the basis for producing biomass that we can take the form of food, feed, forests, fibre, etc. But secondly, it provides ecosystems, ecosystem services in the form of carbon capture to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, purify water, foster biodiversity, cycle nutrients, and is a habitat in its own right, as we know. They are also currently under considerable pressure due to the varying demands of the world's growing population, where we see so much challenges around soil erosion and the rest. So therefore, soil has many stakeholders. Clearly, those who own and use it, farmers, foresters, land managers, etc., are highly important. But citizens at large also have a stake in ensuring that it is cared for and used in a sustainable manner to ensure their food and the environment is healthy. The challenge, therefore, is convincing all citizens that soil is essential, while at the same time asking the people who own and cultivate it to participate in the process of improving soil health in the general interest, as well as in the interest of themselves as business operators. Since I was appointed Minister of State in the Department of Agriculture with special responsibility for research and development at the beginning of July, one challenge I've seen, probably as a layperson addressing the area of research and development, is that at times research projects can be very academic, and it is so critically important, I believe, that we continuously work to create that link between the projects we're working on and people's everyday lives, because at the basis of every research project is something that's very applicable to all our lives. And no more than the general public have become very aware of the likes of the importance, let's say, of the bee in our everyday lives, this is a great opportunity for us to instill into the general public the crucial role that soil plays in our life and how it needs to be mined and harnessed in many ways. And that is why the EU has identified soil health and food as one of its 5 missions under the new Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Programme starting next year. These missions are all about connecting researchers with citizens and translating research findings into practical solutions to pressing problems. They therefore support and complement the targets and ambitions set out in the new EU Green Deal and indeed the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Soils Mission Board has set a target of rendering 75% of soils healthy by 2030 and able to provide essential services we all depend on by then. Their objective now is to win the hearts and minds of those with an interest in soil and are now at the point where they need feedback from all stakeholders throughout the EU. So it's important that those people comment on this mission and on the progress so far, all of us that are those stakeholders. The experts have written down their views. Do you think this is going to work? How could it be improved? We want to intensify the interaction between theory and reality so we can work together to improve soil health in order to turn the objectives we have, 75% of EU soils healthy by 2030, into a reality. I therefore commend Teagasc on devoting 3 webinars in their Research Insight series to this important topic and urge you all to engage in them over the coming weeks and provide valuable feedback that can be used to help finalise the shape of this highly relevant mission. Because, you know, you, the viewer here today, the farmer, the stakeholder, you have the practical knowledge on the ground, and that is what's going to be critical to make sure that we bridge that link between the theory and the practical. So I commend Teagasc for this. I'm delighted to have been invited to participate in this, and I wish you well in the webinar over the course of the day.
Thank you very much, Minister, and apologies. I should have introduced both the Minister and Jean-Francois Soussana, which I neglected to do. So Minister Martin Heydon is the Minister of State with responsibility for research, development, farm safety and new market development at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. He's a former chairman of the Fine Gael party. And he is a native of South Kildare, where he lives with his family on his farm, and he's a former past pupil of Kildalton Agricultural College. Jean-Francois Soussana, again, apologies for not introducing you properly. Jean-Francois is the Vice President in charge of international policy at INRAE, which is the French National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and the Environment. He's a lead author on the IPCC assessment report since 1998 and is a member of the board of the EU Soil Health and Food Mission. So thank you both. So before we move to the next part of the webinar, we're going to show you the official video of the Soil Health and Food Mission from the European Commission, and then we'll move to David Wall, who I will introduce. So if we could play the video, thank you.
Did you know that without healthy soils, there would be no food on your table? That many textiles wouldn't exist? And that there wouldn't even be any wood? If we didn't have healthy soils that filter water, there would be more floods, more droughts, more carbon in the atmosphere, and definitively, less life. In fact, about 25% of European land is affected by water erosion, and the costs associated with soil degradation in the EU may exceed 50 billion euros per year. Without healthy soils, our planet would look very different. We have to make changes. We have to act now. It's our mission to heal the earth together. Healthy soils, healthy planet, healthy people. Caring for soil is caring about life.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for the sound issue, another technical issue at the start of that video. So we'd like to move to the third presentation of the morning. David Wall is a senior research officer in Teagasc Johnstown Castle. His research focuses on soil quality and health, with a particular emphasis on nutrient cycling and soil fertility. He recently coordinated a large national project on soil quality assessment funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and he's going to give a high-level overview of this project today, and that will be followed in the next series of webinars by colleagues who will have a deeper dive into the specifics of that project. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Karl. Good morning, everybody. So as Karl has outlined this morning, I will give an overview of the current status of Irish soil health research, where we are with our research program to date, and how that aligns with the new soil mission for food and health. So without further ado, just to start off, again, Jean-Francois and Minister Heydon have outlined some of the functions that we expect our soils or demand from our soils, such as primary productivity, so biomass production, food, feed, fiber, etc., to recycle our nutrients, potentially our wastes from more urban settings, but also valuable nutrients and animal manures, composts, etc., and that we expect our soils to recycle and to resupply those nutrients back to produce biomass, food, feed, and fiber. We expect our soils to regulate our water. So we've all seen the extreme rainfall in the last number of days or weeks, and we expect the water, the soil to store this water, to help percolate and drain this water away, but also to purify and to strip out any contaminants or nutrients that may otherwise make it to water bodies or even to the oceans. To store our carbon and to regulate our climate, which is very important. It helps us to mitigate the loss of greenhouse gases and to regulate our climate and to prevent the worst effects of climate change. And finally then, as a habitat for biodiversity, the living soil, as the Minister has put it, we expect the soil to be a good habitat for biodiversity to thrive and to help with the provision of these other functions. There are two other demands, the provision of cultural services in terms of, we're rich in these in this country in terms of our castles, our monuments, our passage tombs, etc., and also then as a platform for building. And all soils have the capacity to perform all of these functions simultaneously. However, some soils are better at performing some functions compared with others. And if we think of agriculture, some soils are very good in terms of arable crop production, whereas other soils may be better in terms of grassland production or in terms of provision of biodiversity, habitat, carbon storage, etc. However, we have some threats to soil health and consequently to the soil functions and the functions that we expect, and finally to the ecosystem services. So we expect to have enough food from our agricultural systems as a final service, and back down the line, the soil needs to function in the proper manner, and it needs to be healthy to underpin the production of that food, etc. So I've shown here some of the main threats that may be relevant here in Ireland, but certainly across Europe, such as soil sealing. If we start with the take of land for building, etc., that is a big problem in some areas where good agricultural land is being sealed over with concrete, etc. Soil erosion and flooding. Currently, we don't have a major problem here with soil erosion, but flooding and erosion may become more prevalent if in the advent of climate change. Nutrient depletion is one where our soil fertility levels are not as good or as balanced as they could be, and that's something that we do need to work on. Acidification and the application of lime is important, or if we go to Mediterranean regions where salinization, so the salt issues are a big problem. Compaction is probably the biggest soil threat, single soil threat that is a problem here in Ireland. Soil contamination, be it that we have contamination with nutrients, heavy metals, and then other products such as personal care products, etc., from wastes that are applied to land. And organic matter decline is a major problem throughout Europe, as Jean-Francois outlined there. We are depleting our soil organic matter, especially with some management systems, and it's something that we must tackle to prevent climate change, to help regulate our climate in the future. And finally, biodiversity loss. Obviously, under the Green Deal and the new biodiversity strategy, this has been put to the fore in terms of that we must stop or halt this biodiversity loss and recondition the soils to be a good habitat in terms of a habitat for good biodiversity. In terms of the mission area, I'm not going to spend too much time because the previous speakers and Jean-Francois in particular has outlined the whole mission area, but the target is ambitious. It's 75% of healthy soils by 2030. That is an ambitious target. It's going to take all shoulders to the wheel to achieve this by multiple stakeholders, including scientists, land managers, policymakers, industry, etc. And that is well aligned in terms of the Green Deal objectives that we've heard so much about in recent times: food and nutrition security, to have climate change mitigation, the protection of biodiversity, the reduction of pollution, and vibrant rural areas. So that's really what it's all about. However, if we think about bringing that back down to soil quality, or which now the term is coined soil health, what does that mean, and how does that help us bring this all together? So soil quality has been described as the soil's ability to provide ecosystem service through its capacities to perform vital functions under changing management and climatic conditions. And this is really important. We have different managements and we have different climates in different regions, but under a climate change scenario, potentially our climate here will change somewhat too. And then what's more recently coined the term in terms of soil health brings in that living element and emphasizes that living element in terms of continued capacity for the soil to function as a vital living ecosystem to sustain plants, animals, and humans. And I think these are very useful terms in bringing together this agenda, giving it meaning to all sections of society. And it's something that the scientific community needs to get engaged with. And we're very excited here in Teagasc to be engaged with this new mission and to continue our research in terms of soil health research. In the past, over the last number of years, we've had a completion in terms of the soil survey and the soil map of Ireland. And this is the basis for developing new soil-specific management. So one soil does not fit all. And we know that from our research. Farmers will know that from long-term management of their land and their farms. So how can we harness this information? This information is available to the public on the Irish Soil Information System website. We have lots of indicators, lots of parameters and attributes of the soil that has been measured and is available. And our advisory service is developing their knowledge and their expertise in terms of advising on identification of these soils and then providing information and advice in terms of appropriate management. So this is a very important area. However, when we think about the soil's functional capacity, we have to think a little bit larger. So we have multiple soil types, and research looks at soil physical properties, soil chemical properties, and soil biological properties and processes. And my colleagues in the next series of seminars will go into more detail in terms of physics, chemistry, and biology in terms of soils. However, we also need to bring in the soil is in an environment. It could be a changing environment, both seasonally, but then over time. And also farmers and land managers will apply different managements. So together, we need to bring these three areas together: the soil, by the environment, by the management, and these interrelationships bring together the whole concept of soil health and the capacity of that soil to deliver the different functions that we demand. This is the new area of research. This is the area where we're developing our expertise, and we're really excited to work with partners, research partners nationally and internationally in terms of harnessing this knowledge to better understand our soils and provide advice to different stakeholders. In terms of the research, As Karl has outlined, we've recently completed the SQUARE project, which was funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. We've had some interesting collaboration with our different partners, which was really good and helped us to identify the novel areas in terms of this research. But the overarching aim, which is very well aligned with the new Soil, Food and Health Mission, was to establish a baseline for soil health in Ireland. So an inventory across the country of what the current status in terms of soil health is. And you can see the sites here on the map. These sites were selected by taking account of the climate or the agroclimatic zones within Ireland. Even though it's a relatively small geographic area, it's rather variable from east to west, from north to south in terms of rainfall and temperature in particular. And then also to bring in our knowledge that we have already captured there in terms of identifying different soils within that system. 161 sites were identified and were surveyed over the course of this research project. In terms of the functions and their indicators, so it's really important that we have indicators that allow us to detect current status, and then when we monitor those indicators, we can see the trajectory of change, whether it's positive or negative over time. So what are those soil indicators and which are important? We looked at these different sites, and we looked at the indicators in relation to the soil's functional capacity. So we have soil physical quality and water regulation, and you can see the indicators, nutrient cycling and carbon sequestration, and the different indicators. Carbon sequestration is a very hot topic at the moment in terms of what's the soil's capacity to store carbon, to pull carbon from the atmosphere. And we need to understand what the current stocks are and how we can manage the soils to enhance those stocks and sequester additional carbon over time. Primary productivity, which is, I suppose, agriculture's bread and butter in terms of grass and crop yield. Seasonal plant production, so how does that look temporally? And also then in terms of maintaining that plant growing in terms of plant rooting depth and volume. And then micro and macro biodiversity, which is a whole new area in terms of research. We've taken on new colleagues and new researchers in this area where we're looking at both micro and macro biodiversity. And the new area there is molecular techniques and looking at DNA in terms of looking at who's there, what they're doing, and how we can manage them to enhance those biodiversity and microbial populations. In terms of the last three slides, I'm just going to give you a very brief window into what we found in terms of our first look into the inventory. In terms of soil physical health, here I'm looking at the effects of both soil type and land management, so that soil by environment by management interaction on soil bulk density. So the bulk density is a measurement of the compaction or the density of soil. A higher bulk density is poorer because there's less porosity for roots, for biodiversity, for water, etc. So we can see here in terms of different soil types have different values. Poorly drained soils there, especially with very high management and trafficking, are less resilient and more prone to compaction compared with well-drained soils where there was very little difference depending on the level of management. If we look at soil chemical health as an example, again looking at that soil by environment by management and looking at the soil organic carbon concentration, and we can see there again that poorly drained soils where they're heavily impacted and reduced porosity, there's less storage capacity for that carbon, and carbon can be disturbed at the surface under very wet conditions where it's lost from the system. And then in terms of biological health, looking at the soil microbial biomass, here we can see a different interaction where the two soil types are very, very different, not necessarily the management within the soil types. And you can see there, the poorly drained soil is a better store of carbon and food for this biomass. It provides a good habitat for this biomass compared with the well-drained soil where there's less carbon, potentially more management in terms of reseeding or arable ploughing, etc., and hence less needs to be managed better in terms of providing that habitat for microbial biomass. Finally then, if we think about putting this all together, how are we going to disseminate this information in a practical and understandable way to farmers, to land managers, and also to policymakers to make decisions? And in the Landmark project, which is a trans-European project with many partners right across Europe, we looked at developing a decision support tool for assessing and optimizing these soil functions. And this tool is available online and is a useful resource in terms of running scenarios or running different managements through different soils in your environment to see what are the best management options, or to try to identify the best management options that enhance one or many of the functions as you so desire. So again, you can see there the URL is supplied on this slide, which will be available later. Finally then, in conclusion or discussion points, a large effort is needed to respond to these targets and to the new soil mission. And it's a very exciting time for us as scientists here at Teagasc, but also there for stakeholders in terms of getting on board with this effort, putting the shoulder to the wheel and being able to come up with the solutions and practices to respond to the targets. And I believe it's very achievable going forward. Increasing the scientific knowledge will be required, especially of these interactions. While we've focused a lot on soils in the past, we need to bring these soils into context in terms of their environment and the different management practices to provide the knowledge and basis for corrective management. Information and support for initiatives and policies will be needed going forward. And this is really about scale and the appropriate scale for these managements, be it country, be it regional scale, or be it farm scale initiatives to allow us to achieve these targets. We need practical implementation strategies, and these can be bottom up in terms of farmer initiatives, land manager initiatives, top down in terms of policy incentives, market-driven incentives, etc., or a mixture of both. And I think a conversation needs to be had in terms of coming up with the best mix here to provide a practical solution and a strategy going forward. And also then we mustn't forget the primary land manager, the custodian of the land and the soil resources that we have. Farmers have a lot of knowledge and we need to harness that knowledge in terms of helping us to implement these strategies. We need to improve the education and support for practice adoption. And overall, I'll say that as a scientist and working with Teagasc, it is a very exciting time. We're involved in the EJP, the European Joint Programme for Soil, with colleagues, Jean-Francois' colleagues at INRAE and many more, to really engage in this topic, to provide the solutions and knowledge going forward. And I believe that we can really make an impact by bringing everybody on board. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David, for that. And again, that's a high-level summary of the soils in Ireland. And look, I remind participants to type your answers into the Q&A tab. I see there's one or two going into the chat, but I can only keep an eye on one thing at a time. So if you can please use the Q&A tab. So maybe just opening it out to Jean-Francois, I suppose achieving 75% of our soils being of healthy status raises the question, what is healthy status for soils? And are there threshold values established already, or will that be part of, I suppose, what the research will be carried out as part of the soil mission?
Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, in the mission board, we have defined 6 indicators which we think are central for soil health. And through the combination of those indicators, we could define whether a soil is healthy or unhealthy. Our view is that, in fact, for a healthy soil to happen, we need that all those indicators are satisfactory. So it's a sort of a method where you believe it's one out, all out with those 6 indicators. So let me explain very briefly the 6 indicators. And you could find this if you like to see further details online if you search for the deliverable 2 actually of the Soil Health and Food Mission Board. So our first indicator refers to the presence of soil pollutants and of excess nutrients and salts. As we understand, any polluted soils or soil or any soil having excess nutrients would be considered as unhealthy. The next one is vegetation cover. We think that to reduce erosion, surface runoff, and so on, we need to have a good duration of the vegetation cover, and as far as possible, diverse vegetation cover. Next one is soil organic carbon, which was already referred to. And obviously, we need to have some organic matter and soil organic carbon content that is enough. And this can be also confronted towards when we look at the target of increasing soil organic carbon stocks. The fourth indicator is about the soil structure. And David also mentions this, that we need to have a good soil structure. And this is also not having compaction, for instance. Soil biodiversity is the 5th indicator. We have heard already that there are methods to understand the diversity of the microorganisms and macroorganisms in soils. And the 6th indicator is about availability of nutrients that are needed for the vegetation growth, and also about the soil pH. So that's what is our proposed list of indicators to determine whether a soil is healthy or not. This clearly requires further work, and ultimately we would like to see a map using those indicators and covering Europe and member state countries. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jean-Francois. So David, maybe over to you. There's a few questions around, I suppose, how Irish soils would compare to being sort of healthy. You know, what do you, or what has the research so far highlighted in relation to Irish soils, and how do they compare to maybe some other member state soils?
Okay, in terms of the baseline that we have, and this baseline was collected from around 2015 up to into 2016, we find that in a general statement that our soils are reasonably healthy, especially when aligned with the indicators that Jean-Francois has outlined. We have good levels of soil organic carbon, sufficient in terms of what would be enough to deliver most of the functions. However, we can do better in areas such as arable soils, and areas that are intensively managed can take on more, and we need to protect what we have. Some of the areas, I suppose, are threats that we found were more stark or more higher an issue were compaction. So while we found that in general our soils are not overly compacted, there is areas where, and some soil types that are less resilient in terms of compaction, especially from machinery compaction. So that's an area that we need to watch out for. And then in terms of nutrients, we know that 90% of our soils are suboptimal in one or more nutrients or pH. So that's a big area where, for production, but also for the other soil functions and ecosystem services, we need to achieve nutrient balance for our farming systems, but also for the delivery of other ecosystem services. So in general statement, we do compare favorably. However, that doesn't allow us to sit on our laurels in terms of the future. We need to look at where the threats are and interact and be proactive against those.
And how do you think we compare to maybe other member states?
In terms of other member states, we don't have the same issues in terms of carbon or whatever compared with, we'll say, the Mediterranean region. Obviously, heat, soil erosion is a bigger issue out there. However, we have different issues. So flooding in future on the other side will become more of an issue in terms of maintaining good vegetation cover to hold that soil in situ. Structure is going to be a really important one, because the windows for management are becoming less and less, and we're being forced somewhat to operate in less ideal conditions. And then obviously nutrients going forward, looking at excessive nutrients, etc. With increased rainfall, etc., there's more capacity for those to be stripped out. So we do compare favorably. However, there is other risks that are more specific, and this is why I go back to the soils in their environment and how they're managed in our context is really important to understand that.
Okay, thank you, David. So obviously, in order to achieve 75% healthy soils, you need to measure and monitor soil health. So Jean-Francois, you made mention of lighthouse farms, but I suppose what is the view on the mission board to the monitoring and evaluation of soil health across member states?
Yeah, thank you, Karl. Well, this is obviously fairly important, and we heard also from David that there are important research programs starting now, like the European Joint Programme on Soils, that will certainly advance the way the soil data are organized in Europe, the way the monitoring and the surveys is advancing, and also how this comes together at European scale, because if we want to understand what happens, we also need to put together all those data in a consistent manner and be able to benchmark different countries and the baseline and how they progress. So this is in fact very ambitious, because it requires further investments into soil surveys. If I just compare with the situation with water bodies, I can just say that far more investments have been made because of the Water Framework Directive on measuring water quality, measuring thousands of components potentially that may affect water quality. And compared to this, the national investments and European investments on soils are far less. So there is sort of imbalance there that we think needs to be corrected. And for sure, the improving soil health will also benefit to water quality, just as an example, will also benefit to air quality, by the way. So all this needs to be organized, and we see a large interest of European Commission in investing in this, and also of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, which is in charge of organizing the European soil data. So I'm quite hopeful we will get there, but as I said, it needs really rethink and further investments.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Francois. So look, we've only 1 or 2 minutes left, and there is some questions around lighthouse farms. So I suppose in Ireland at the moment, Teagasc is advancing the Signpost Farm initiative, which is a broad sustainability farming initiative across a range of diverse farming types, not just specialist farms, but also diverse farms, mixed farms, etc. So you'll be hearing more about that in the near future. In relation to nutrients, David, there was some comments around you know, you mentioned depleting soil nutrients, but there's obviously the excessive soil nutrients, and there's questions around, you know, eutrophication and water quality. So how would you see the soil health monitoring feeding into linking with water quality?
Okay, so again, we have established threshold values for different crops, different animal systems, etc. What we're moving towards is more soil-specific advice and thresholds in terms of advice to farmers for these nutrients. So yes, nutrient enrichment in localized spots can become a problem, especially if they're connected with water bodies or if you're in very leachable soil area in terms of groundwater. So it's something that we're putting a lot of effort into at the moment. With the new NNP online decision support system for farmers and for farmer advisors, that's at a field scale, not at a farm scale. So at field and paddock scale, if we start to manage these resources better, there's economies for farmers. We achieve a better and more holistic balance in terms of the nutrients and pH across the farm, and that will pay a double or a triple dividend in terms of soils, environment, and economics.
Look, thank you, David. Thank you, Jean-Francois, and thank you to the Minister as well for his opening remarks. I'm going to draw the webinar to a close as the time has just gone, and I thank everybody in the audience for their participation in the webinar. As a soil scientist, I'm really excited to see the innovative new research that's going to be carried out nationally and internationally as part of the EU Soil Mission. It's really exciting to see soils getting placed at the same level as water quality or as climate change. There will be more information available on the webinar series webpage, including links to the various EU and national documentation. Or if you want to rewatch this webinar. The next two research webinars, as I mentioned, will dive deeper into the chemical, biological and physical quality of Irish soils and their importance for removing and storing carbon from the atmosphere. After the webinar here, you'll receive a link for an exit survey, and I would encourage you to complete that to give us some feedback so we can further tailor the webinars. And thank you all for your active participation, and we look forward to your participation in the next webinar on the 9th of September at 9:30 in the morning. Thank you very much.